In the vast expanse of the desert, where the sand seemed endless and the horizon was painted in fire each evening, Private First Class Emily Carter had one of the most overlooked roles in her unit. She drove the SUV. To many, she was just the one who kept the convoy moving, the hands on the steering wheel, while soldiers with higher ranks and heavier weapons made the big decisions. Yet Emily had grown up in the shadow of men who thought she would never be more than support, told countless times to stay in the truck, sweetheart, as if bravery had a gender, as if grit and determination could not be found in her heart. What they didn't know was that Emily's entire life had been leading up to a moment that would shatter their underestimations and force even the enemy to respect her. She had joined the army not for glory but for survival. Her father had been a mechanic in Kentucky, her mother a diner waitress, and money was always short. When recruiters came to her high school, Emily saw not uniforms but opportunity, a chance to pay for college, to prove herself, to do something bigger than waiting tables like her mom. But what no one, not even Emily, realized was how the war zone had a way of testing not just soldiers but souls, stripping them down to the raw truth of who they were and who they could become. The unit she drove for was known as Delta 4, a squad of hardened men who had already seen more firefights than birthdays celebrated in the past 3 years. Sergeant Mason, the squad leader, was the type who barked orders sharp enough to cut through steel, and he never looked twice at Emily except when he told her to keep the engine running. To him, she was a seatbelt with legs, necessary, but not part of the fight. Private Ortiz, on the other hand, teased her constantly, calling her sweetheart driver, but beneath the jokes was a quiet protectiveness, as if he knew the day might come when she would need someone watching her back. The mission that changed everything began like any other, a routine convoy run through hostile territory, escorting supplies to an outpost on the edge of nowhere. The sun was merciless that morning, baking the sand into glassy waves, and the air was thick with a silence that always meant trouble. Emily gripped the wheel with her calloused hands, scanning the road for IEDs the way others might scan sidewalks for potholes. Her SUV was second in the line of vehicles, a position that felt both protective and vulnerable, shielded by the lead truck yet exposed if an ambush came from behind. She thought about her father's voice, telling her back when she first learned to drive, always look ahead, but never forget to check your mirrors, danger has a habit of sneaking up. Those words played in her mind just seconds before the explosion tore the sky open. The lead truck erupted in fire, a column of smoke punching upward as shrapnel and sand rained down. Emily's instincts kicked in, foot on the brake, hands steady, but before she could process, the gunfire started. It came from the ridges, dozens of muzzles flashing in unison, an ambush meticulously planned. Soldiers leapt from their trucks, returning fire, the desert erupting into chaos. Sergeant Mason's voice roared over the radio, ordering positions, barking commands, but in the whirlwind, something unexpected happened. The SUV Emily drove became the only vehicle left maneuverable, the others trapped in flames or riddled with bullet holes. "Stay in the truck!" Mason yelled, his tone cutting, but Emily saw what he couldn't. 2 of their men pinned down behind the burning lead vehicle, unable to move as enemy fire chewed into the sand around them. Something inside her snapped. She slammed the SUV into gear, tires spitting sand, and gunned it straight toward the enemy fire. Bullets clanged against the armored doors, sparks flying like fireflies in the noon sun, but she didn't let up. Her heart pounded, not with fear but with clarity. If she didn't move, those men were dead. She swung the SUV sideways, using its bulk as a shield, the soldiers scrambling behind her to safety. In that moment, for the first time, Delta 4 saw not just a driver but a fighter. But the enemy saw her too, and they remembered. From that day on, whispers spread through the region about the woman in the SUV, the one who drove into hell without flinching. She had no idea that her boldness had painted a target on her back. Days later, the ambushes grew sharper, more focused, as if they weren't just after the squad, they were after her. The enemy began calling her the Ghost Driver, a name spoken with both fear and hatred. Emily found herself thrust into a role she never asked for: symbol, threat, legend. Sergeant Mason, once dismissive, began to study her differently, his orders now carrying a respect he never gave before. Ortiz, always joking, grew quieter, more serious when she was around. And Emily, though still gripping the wheel, felt the weight of something larger than herself pressing down: responsibility, expectation, destiny. The next mission pushed her further than ever. Delta 4 was tasked with transporting a high-value detainee, a man with ties to the ambush networks that had been crippling U.S. convoys. Emily was behind the wheel once again, her SUV carrying the prisoner in shackles. The road was treacherous, lined with shadows and the promise of betrayal. Halfway through the canyon pass, the trap was sprung. RPGs streaked across the sky, one striking the SUV ahead, flipping it like a toy. The convoy scattered, and chaos reigned once more. But this time, the enemy didn't spray their bullets blindly, they aimed for Emily's SUV, the one carrying not just soldiers but their captured comrade. The desert echoed with shouts in a language she didn't understand, but the meaning was clear: they wanted her. As bullets punched into the armor, Emily's hands tightened on the wheel. She drove like her father taught her, weaving, dodging, using the terrain itself as cover. But when the road ahead collapsed under another blast, leaving only fire and rubble, she made a choice that would define her forever. Instead of retreating, instead of waiting for orders, she spun the SUV off the road, plunging into the open desert where no path existed. Sand roared under the tires, the prisoners screaming in the back, soldiers clutching their rifles as the vehicle bounced and lurched. Pursuers followed, trucks with mounted guns, but Emily drove with a precision that felt almost otherworldly, every swerve and turn instinctive, every decision razor-sharp. Hours later, after breaking through enemy lines, after leading the convoy to safety through terrain no one believed possible, she stopped the SUV only when fuel was nearly gone. The men inside stared at her in silence, their disbelief mingling with awe. That night, around the fire, Mason finally admitted what none of them could deny: "You saved us all today." Not just a driver. Never just a driver. The words sank into her bones, but Emily knew this wasn't the end. For every victory, the enemy grew more determined, more obsessed. They no longer saw her squad as faceless Americans, they saw her. And when they whispered her name, when they plotted their ambushes, it wasn't Mason or Ortiz they targeted. It was Carter. She was hunted not because she was a soldier but because she was proof that underestimation can be deadly. Weeks later, in the dead of night, the enemy struck harder than ever before, not with bullets but with cunning. They captured Ortiz during a patrol, leaving behind a message scrawled in blood on the sand: "Send the driver, or he dies." It was a trap, obvious as the sun, but Emily couldn't walk away. Against orders, against reason, she volunteered for the extraction. Alone, she drove into the night, headlights off, heart pounding, carrying nothing but her rifle and her determination. The rescue that followed was a blur of shadows and fire. Emily infiltrating enemy lines, using the SUV not just as transport but as weapon, smashing barricades, scattering fighters, carving a path where none existed. She pulled Ortiz from the brink, bleeding but alive, and when the dust settled, the enemy learned the final truth: she was no longer just the ghost driver. She was the storm. By the time the unit rotated home, Emily Carter's legend had already spread. She had gone from overlooked private to whispered name, from driver to warrior, from someone told to stay in the truck to someone who made the truck a weapon of salvation. But what mattered most wasn't the medals or the stories, it was that she had shown, to her brothers in arms and to the enemy alike, that courage wears no label, and respect is earned in fire. She went home not as a symbol but as herself, carrying the scars of war and the memory of the desert, knowing that sometimes the smallest roles hide the greatest heroes. And now, I'll leave it to you. Tell me, from which part of the country are you watching this story?